Hi everyone, welcome to Green Apple Books. I'm Brendan McHugh, I'm a bookseller here. And tonight I am delighted to introduce you and welcome Laura Vandenberg and their conversation partner Meng Jin tonight at Green Apple. Let's give them a round of applause. And we are here tonight for Laura's book, State of Paradise, and we're going to give another round of applause. Because didn't you just tell me that the last book you had came out during COVID, so this is like...
It's true,
Oh,
yes.
You made it. All right. So before I introduce them, I just want to do some business for you all. So first, I want to announce that we are broadcasting from San Francisco, and thank you to everyone joining us here and online. We are on unceded Ramaytush Ohlone land, and I hope you join us in our pledge to turn a land acknowledgement into action and donate either your time or monetary means to an Indigenous organization every time you hear a land acknowledgement. We have a QR code at the back near the book that allows you to scan and find out more about that. All right, so brief business. Now is a great time to silence your phones. That'd be great. But I think it's okay with you both. Picture taking is encouraged and allowed. Post it all over social media. Let everyone know you're here to buy the books. And while you're there online, you can also check out our event calendar. We have some great events coming up tomorrow night, as well as throughout the month of July and August, and more throughout the fall. The restroom is behind us. You cannot use it right now or during the event for obvious reasons. So please be patient. And we have copies of both of Laura and Meng's books up front of the registers, and both of them will be up for signing them after the event tonight. So that's that. All right. And a special note that when you buy books from us, you're not just supporting independent bookstores, but also supporting writers who put so much work into their books like these two. And you also get to have a book. It's a big part. All right. So Meng Jin is the author of the novel Little Gods and the short story collection Self-Portrait with Ghost. She is a Kundiman Fellow and a David T.K. Wong Fellow, a Steinbeck Fellow, and indebted to many other institutions, granting bodies, and kind humans for their support. Her short fiction has been anthologized in the Best American Short Stories and Pushcart Prizes, and her books have been nominated for the Penn Faulkner Penn Open Book Award, New York Public Library Young Lions Prize, the LA Times First Fiction Prize, and she is currently writing a fake memoir for which she received a 2021 Creative Capital Award. All right. And now the main event. Laura Vandenberg is the author of three story collections, including I Hold a Wolf by the Ears, which was named one of the 10 best fiction books of 2020 by Time, and the novels Find Me and The Third Hotel, which was a finalist for the New York Public Library Young Lions Fiction Award. She is the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship, a Strauss Living Award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, Bard Fiction Prize, a Penn O. Henry Award, and McDowell Colony Fellowship. She's also a two-time finalist for the Frank O'Connor International Short Story Award. Born and raised in Florida, she splits her time between the Boston area and Central Florida. And now I'm going to turn it over to you two and go away. All right, let's give them both a warm welcome and big round of applause.
Hi everyone.
So I think Laura's going to read a little bit first from her book, and then we'll start talking.
Yes, I am indeed. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm going to read just a little bit from the opening of State of Paradise. In Florida, I am a writer, though not a real one. I ghost for a very famous thriller author. When I first got the job, I spent a month reading books by the famous author to better understand the task that lay before me. The chapters were always short. The sentences never had too many words. The phrase, "everything is not as it seems," appeared in nearly all the book descriptions. Whenever I'm stuck on a chapter, I just write, "Everything is not as it seems," and press on. In my line of work, this phrase is like hot sauce or ranch dressing. You can put it on nearly everything. Ghostwriting is a largely unregulated industry. We are the animating force behind many a celebrity memoir and blockbuster detective series. Some ghosts regard themselves as collaborators. They lobby for cover credit, interviews, press. Others like the idea of being invisible. It is the act of vanishing that attracts them to the work in the first place. Other ghosts, such as myself, are paid just well enough to write our chapters and keep our mouths shut. We are like the staff of a country estate. We keep the place running, and we are meant to blend into the background. Ghosting is not how I intended to spend my days on this earth, but the world feels precarious, and so I struggle to break free from the job. I belong to a fleet of ghosts and have never actually corresponded with the famous author himself. I often imagine him wandering a castle in a silk bathrobe in some small, cold country, Switzerland, Austria, and slicing the air with a silver letter opener as he concocts his plots, even though I know the author lives in a mansion down in Palm Beach. From the famous author's team of assistants, I get templates of scenes, and then it's up to me to fill in the details, paint by numbers, writing. When I finish a chapter, I send it on to the assistants to weed out anything of myself that I might have tried to smuggle in. If I submit chapters that are too well written, too descriptive, too vulnerable, too precise, the assistants become upset, tell me to cut the flourishes. They want the language to do the opposite of what language should do, which is leave a mark. They want the language to be forgettable, familiar, digestible, to enter into the reader and disappear without a trace. In Florida, I count cats. I first started counting the cats, a mix of strays and outdoor pets with collars and bells while walking the dog, and soon realized that we are hopelessly surrounded. Cats lounge on driveways and front lawns, crouch like gargoyles on porch railings and fence posts, lurk in the bushes and under cars and behind trees, peer out from underneath crawl spaces. The derelict houses in the neighborhood appear to have been overtaken by cats. They crowd the decaying front porches, use the walls as scratching posts, and nearly all the non-derelict houses have what my husband and I refer to as a stoop cat. My husband is interested in acquiring a stoop cat of our own, and I keep trying to explain to him that if we want a stoop cat, we'll have to leave food out, that there is no such thing as a free stoop cat. But he is nervous that such an offering will attract rats. He is sure he's seen the rodents wrestling around in the tawny heads of palm trees. My husband is nervous about a lot of things down here, like the monstrous size of fire ants and the quality of the gasoline, because half the time the gas stations are out, the nozzles bundled up in black garbage bags, or the credit card readers don't work, or the attendant is a shirtless man with a hip flask tucked into the waistband of his shorts. I keep trying to explain that this is a place with its own laws. Meanwhile, my old rhythms are flooding back. How to trap lizards with mason jars, walking the dog in a sports bra and cutoffs, dropping letters from my sentences when I greet people on the street. I feel like I am meeting a version of myself that I had nearly forgotten. She feels a bit dangerous, this version. I suspect she's been waiting on me all these years like a scorpion curled up inside the heel of a boot. One morning, I'm walking the dog and I hear a hissing sound right above my head. A black cat perched in a neighbor's arbor, flashing its teeth from behind white sprigs of star jasmine. I have no superstitions about black cats. I started taking photos of the cats with my phone, which they do not appreciate. When the camera appears, they look away, flick their tails, spring up and shoot it underneath a house, dive into some brush. Save for this one cat that stared right into the camera, orange and royal as a lion. A few nights later, on an evening walk with my dog, we passed 10 cats, all stretched out in the scorched crabgrass behind a neighbor's back door. They watch us as we pass, their furred heads turning slowly at the same time. They look like they are casually dreaming of murder. like they are guarding a portal to the underworld, like they have been alive since the dawn of Earth. Sometimes I dream that all these cats live in the castle with a famous thriller author who employs me. The cats like the weather in the small, cold country just as they like the chilly stone and the velvet chase lounges inside. In my dreams, the cats are the ones who come up with all the book ideas. They stand on their hind legs and dictate the plots to the author. How about an FBI agent who was forced into early retirement by a medical allergy to sunlight, but must return to the field when her past threatens to catch up with her, as it always does? Humans never learn, which is what makes these books so amusing to us. All the scenes would have to take place at night, of course. We'll call this one The Midnight Cure. In my dreams, the famous author is less king of the castle than prisoner in a garret, barricaded in a room with all these cats purring non-stop with ideas. He types like a man rowing a boat in the shadow of a tidal wave. And I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you for that beautiful reading, Laura. I'm so excited to be here today to talk about this amazing book. As you've heard, it's like super pleasurable on the sentence level. It was so yummy to read. I was also really excited to be asked to do this because I feel like a lot of uncanny signs in my life have been pointing me towards you. Hopefully that's not creepy.
Totally here for it.
But I was like, oh, this is like a Laura Vandenberg story. People keep on telling me about Laura Vandenberg, and then I get asked to do an event with her.
I'm just like psychically stalking you all this time. Yes.
Yeah. But when I started reading the book, it felt also uncanny because there were so many things in the book that I was also interested in, like virtual realities, portals, psychiatric institutions, the desire to leave this world. Yeah. Mirror selves, as sort of mentioned in one of the passages you read. And also, it's about kind of spending the pandemic in a weird time in a weird place, like Florida. Yeah. We talked a little bit. I spent a little bit of my pandemic in Florida. Which leads me to my first question, what was the strangeness of just being in this strange time, in this strange place that was also your childhood home? Was that like at one point in the book, I think the narrator says, I long for a deeper impetus. Yeah. Was that the deeper impetus behind this book, or what was, if it was?
Yes. Thank you for that. I'm so happy to be in conversation with you too. So thank you for that question. So I grew up in Central Florida, and I left in my early 20s, and I left with like the urgency of a person fleeing a burning house. Like that's how it felt in my imagination. I was in a lot of pain when I left, and I sort of associated that pain with Florida, and didn't see it as like a safe feeling place. And my whole family's there, so I always went back, but never for very long. It would be like a few days for a holiday, in and out. And my relationship to the place was like, it was like navigating a hot stove, where it's like you could touch it quickly and then pull away. But I was very nervous to leave my hand on the stove for too long. And then my husband and I were living in Austin, Texas. He's a writer also. And we had to leave the apartment that we were living in at the start of the pandemic, and it seemed logical to drive to Orlando because, it was a day's drive, and we thought, we would stay there for like a few weeks until the whole thing blew over. And for various reasons, initially connected to the pandemic, and then for other reasons, we ended up staying for almost 3 years. And I never expected to go home. I never thought I wanted to go home or needed to go home. And it turned out that I might not have wanted to go home, but I really did need to go home. There was just a lot of stuff that I had felt like I had sort of like smothered with a pillow, and in the early days of the pandemic, it was like that moment in a movie where the vampire sits up from the coffin and you're like, oh, you're not as undead as these parts of the self were not as undead as I had thought that they were. So there was stuff like in my own life that, going home gave me an opportunity to reckon with. I weirdly moved through like a lot of conflict and intensity with my family, but I think we came out much closer because we had to sort of deal with stuff. Like I wasn't getting on a plane in a few days, we were just sort of in it until we either, figured it out or didn't. So I think this book like really did grow out of going home and how difficult that can be, especially when it's not on your terms, but also how transformative it can be too.
Yeah, you definitely feel that. It feels like a love story and a hate story to a place at the same time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So the passages you read were great, but they're actually kind of like normal compared to a lot of the rest of the book. At one point, the father in the book describes the narrator-writer's writing and says, I think the quote is, "This is some weird shit." Yeah. And there's a lot of like weird shit that sort of magically coheres together in this. So I'm just curious, like how did you pick out which weird shit to put in? Yeah. How did you decide? How did it like come together as this like cohesive and really like compelling, compulsive story?
Yeah. The father character, who is somewhat based on my own dad, who died a few years ago, but that was the very amazing thing that my dad said to me when he read one of the first short stories that I'd ever written, and he like read it very seriously. I think maybe I sat in front of him while he was reading it, so eagerly awaiting his opinion about it, and he said, "This is some weird shit, but I think you should keep going."
Great.
Yeah, it's just like perfect. So I think that there are kind of two worlds that this book brings together. There's an auto-fictional element, so in some ways the experiences, and particularly the personal history of the ghostwriter, map somewhat closely onto my own experiences, and that's interwoven with a speculative plot. And what I love about speculative fiction is the way that it can take things that are already in our world. Like, I don't feel necessarily compelled to invent new dangers because we have so many, and we don't know what to do about a lot of them. But I think I'm interested in how speculative fiction can take the dangers that are already with us and amplify them in a way where it allows us to see a clear shape. And to have maybe like a shift in perspective. And so that's how, I think of there's definitely some weird, like borderline sci-fi stuff going on. And that's sort of what I was interested in. There's also this moment in the book where the ghostwriter, the narrator, talks about, there's a story she tells about something that happened to her, and she tells different versions. And she says, "I've been telling myself different versions for years, searching for the one that could match what it felt like to live it." And for me, like, that is the essence of why I write fiction. It's the search to find the fictional version that can match what it felt like to be inside the experience. And for me, at least, writing about, what literally happened or sort of approaching it through the lens of realism doesn't necessarily help me meet that ideal. And I find sometimes like stuff has to get weird in order for me to get to that version that could at least stand a chance of matching what it felt like to live it.
Yeah, I totally feel that. Okay, so my next question is about two words that you said in your last answer.
Yeah.
I think I read somewhere, I don't remember where, somebody called this book speculative autofiction. Yeah. And that really stuck with me because Sometimes I call the book I'm writing now like a speculative memoir. So I was like, oh, it's speculative autofiction. I guess I'm curious, like, were those words going through your head together? What do you think of that term? And yeah.
Yeah, I feel it's accurate. I mean, I sort of jokingly, but also not really, called this my sci-fi memoir for a long time. Yeah. So it's and there's a writer that I really admire named Sofia Samatar, and she has done a lot of interesting work in the space of prose, but also there's some great interviews with her about this. If anyone's like interested in this kind of like sub genre, where she talks about like how, I mean, this kind of goes back to what I was saying before about searching for the version that could feel match what it felt like to live it, but how the sort of the impossible, the fantastic, the speculative can hold things that are really unique and can be a particular can be particularly potent when it comes to writing about trauma, like these experiences that do fracture our sense of reality, that do distort our connection to our body or our relationship to time. And I was very compelled by a lot of her work and her sort of thinking on this genre. And so that was definitely in my imagination. I mean, I would never sit down to write and be like, I am working on my sci-fi memoir today. You know what I mean? Like, I'm writing from a much more intuitive place. But when I had a draft and I was sort of standing back and taking a more panoramic view of like, what is this? That's definitely sort of the vein that I saw myself working in.
Yeah. So at what point did you, I mean, it's a book about writing. You just said it's my speculative memoir. But at what point did you like realize, I'm writing a book about writing a book? Yeah. How much did you have?
So the like very nascent origins of this project at the start of the pandemic, I had intended to work on an entirely different book. I was working on a literary noir that's set in a small town boxing gym in Florida. Boxing is like the other half of my life. And I've been wanting to write about boxing for a long time and was really excited to start this project. But it's like a much architecturally larger and more intricate novel. And I just found that I could not sustain the concentration to work on it. And also, and it was like, of course, a very intense time in the world, an intense time for me personally, like being home with my mom and my sister. A lot of like memories were being activated. I was having hyper vivid dreams. Like I would wake up and feel like I could see things in the dream still in the room. And I was thinking about stuff that I hadn't thought about in a really long time. And I think a few months in, I realized that this is a period of time that I need to find a way to document, and that if I don't find a way to document it, I'm going to regret it later. And so I started this just personal diaristic project where I would do a daily meditation on some aspect of landscape or family or memory or a dream. And I did this for about 6 or 8 months. And I never showed them to anyone or really talked about them. It was totally like a personal, private, tucked away kind of thing. It was just a conversation that I was having with myself. And then one day, this is like the magic, all the writers, and this is like the weird magic of fiction or writing or making something. One day I did one of these meditations and I was like, something feels different. And I realized that it wasn't quite my voice. It was the voice of this ghostwriter. So someone who is not me exactly, even if, there are also a number of parallels. And I found that I kept doing these meditations after that point in a voice that was like mine, but also not mine. And so it was the moment where this project acquired like an independent intelligence, And I sort of recognized that it was turning into something else, something different than what I had initially intended.
Wow, thanks for sharing that. That's amazing. So this is like the shadow book of your subconscious.
Yeah. And I was so relieved that she was a ghostwriter because I didn't see myself writing a book about a novelist. But ghostwriting, I had an acquaintance who ghostwrote for a very famous thriller author, and it sounded so weird, very different than ghostwriting like one book with one person, like a celebrity memoir or something like that. He was part of just this anonymous pool of ghostwriters, and it just sounded deeply strange. So that was compelling, and also I think part of one thing that this character is struggling with is that she doesn't know how to tell her own story.
Yeah.
And so what she does for a living is she uses her words to tell other people's stories. And then part of her journey is learning how to tell her own story. Yeah. So it also, I was really interested in that too, writing saved my life in a million different ways. And it's continued to save my life at like a million different points. And I started thinking, what if there was an alternate version of myself in a different world, in a different strand of reality that didn't have that? Yeah. What would she be doing instead?
Yeah. And I love how in the book, you don't realize how weird it is. It really trickles in that you're not quite in this world. Yeah. Especially because some of the, I'm not the type of person who Googles things while they're reading, but I think some of the weird things are true. And then
most of the weird things are true.
Yeah. But then some of them, I'm like, okay, that's definitely not true. Yeah. Okay, so while you were talking about meditation, there's a meditation. One of the things that I really loved in this book, I hope this isn't too much of a spoiler. I don't think it's too much of a spoiler.
I trust you.
Okay. One of the things that slowly trickles into non-reality is this device called Mind's Eye, which is a virtual reality meditation app. And I guess I'm curious, in that thread, there is this, similar to the love story, hate story with Florida, it feels like there's this ambivalence with technology and questioning virtual reality. It feels like you're trying to maybe find hope in a device like Mind's Eye. Yeah. I'd love to hear more about how that strand of the story came about, if it was related to your daily meditations. Yeah,
I think at a certain point, portals is a central sort of theme or idea, and I think the idea of the portal is what unifies the speculative and the auto. I was thinking a lot about how the pandemic was a portal to a different kind of reality, in the sense that one day we're going about our business and we're at book events and getting coffee, and then the next day we're I guess I should sanitize my mail. So it's just, it's we crossed over into this other world all of a sudden. I thought about being in the midst of a mental health crisis can feel like a portal where I've gone through to this other place and no one can understand what I'm trying to tell them. I was thinking a lot about how art is a portal, writing a book is a portal. And I think technology is a portal too. There's so many times where, it's my mom and my sister, my husband, we're all in the same room, but we're all on our phones, which is a very common sight, a very common domestic scene in this day and age. And so it's we've all gone down some kind of portal. We're someplace, we're not here, we're someplace else, but we're also in different elsewheres. We haven't gone through the same portal. And so I started thinking a lot about, technology as portal, and Mind's Eye is a kind of Oculus headset that was invented by a mysterious tech scion. And purportedly Mind's Eye provides people with these really immersive meditations. It's supposed to be good for you. But as the ghostwriter would say, everything is not as it seems. Everything is definitely not as it seems with Mind's Eye.
But then it is a little good for them.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Well, with this good mean.
Yes. I'm like dangerously close to spoiler territory, but
yeah.
yes. But I was thinking a lot about technology as portal, and also the desire. I mean, I was just as I do, reading a lot of contemporary fiction, and I started to notice time travel coming up in books again and again, which seems so natural, right? Like we're at a point in history where it seems totally natural to be like, this can't be like the only thing, right? Like maybe there's another world out there where people have found solutions that we are really struggling to find. So that I think this book is also interested in the idea of utopias and what is a utopia? What does it mean? Like what also has to happen in order for a utopia to become possible? And I think that there's a utopian quality to that search for another world, even if that search can also be very destructive in its way.
Yeah.
So I think that is part of the Mind's Eye project. It is in some ways like a utopian search for another world, but also like it's a lot of problems at the same time.
Yeah. I love that. I love that in this interest that the book has in portals. The novel is also presented as a portal. Yeah, and I think the narrator prefers the novel as a portal to other portals, perhaps. Yeah. So you talked a little bit about how mental health crises can be a portal, and another strand of maybe one of the central like emotional strands of this book is the narrator's history at a place called the Institute. I have like so many questions about the Institute. One of them is like, are there a lot? It feels to me, anecdotally, it seems like Florida is a place with a lot of institutes like this. Weirdly enough, maybe you can tell me if this is true or not. And then also, I guess I'm just curious, like as you were writing this part of the book, like what you were thinking about, like the history of psychiatry and psychiatric treatment, and also like the stories that we tell ourselves about our traumas and how we heal.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Institute is this part of the narrator's history that she's really preoccupied with, and that, I mean, her experience is very close to my own experience, where I had like a total mental health collapse when I was 15, and I spent 8 months at an inpatient treatment facility, which is a really long time, and B, that's such a like tender formative age. And I remember when I sort of emerged, I later did a GED to finish out high school. I never went back to conventional high school, and then did like continuing ed for my college. So I had a really different educational experience than my peers, and I would occasionally like bump into people that I had known in school before this happened, and I just remember this feeling of being so like, I felt like an alien, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like they were talking about like prom and graduation and all of this stuff, and it was just like, I have no idea what it was like to do those things. I think in some ways it's probably why I'm a writer, or at least one of the reasons. Like I think for a writer, a little bit of outsiderness is helpful because it gives you a different perspective than people who are at like the center of experience. And I felt like, I mean, even if I know now this isn't like objectively true, but I felt like I was forever on the outside after that. So, and it's something that I've kind of like written into, or I would say written around in some other books. I have a short story in my last collection that touches on this a little, but it was a very formative experience for me, and it's not ever something I've written about directly. And it was just one of those moments where, I'm 40, right? So this was a long time ago, where I really felt like the younger version of myself. I've smothered her with a pillow. I've nailed shut the coffin. And in Florida, like all the bullets came out of the coffin, and she sat up and was like right there. And I was just like, oh no, like this person has to be dealt with. So it was just time. It was just time to write about that in a more, direct way.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that was really striking to me is that when I started to be like, okay, the time has come to write about this part of my life, there was so much I didn't remember. Like I had long conversations with my mom to try and just fill in basic things about the timeline. But I wrote down every single detail that I could remember. And most of that is in the book. So I think that it also occurred to me, like, to me, writing fiction or writing narrative is so much about putting experiences in like a narrative sequence, which is to say, part of our project is dealing with time and shaping time and molding time. And I had this weird feeling, which was like kind of a powerful insight to have about myself, of like why I write.
Yeah.
I hadn't really been aware that the gaps in my memory were so significant. And I was like, oh, I wonder if I gravitated toward telling stories as a way to kind of heal my relationship to time or restore my relationship to time in some capacity. And that's something I was thinking a lot about when I was working on this book. So yeah, I mean, it was like an intense space to be in, but it also felt sort of necessary. And there was something about kind of going through it and coming out the other side that was, I'm a little hesitant to use the word healing, doesn't feel right exactly, but something like healing adjacent.
Yeah.
It was like scalding, but kind of restorative at the same time. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I have a question. This is going to be my last question before I open it up to audience questions. So if you have a question for Laura, please start thinking about putting it into words. Okay, but this is actually not a question from me exactly, but from a former student, Emma Choi. Actually, well, it starts with a compliment. Emma Choi says, Laura was the teacher who gave me my favorite description of plot, levels of the ocean, parentheses. What happens in the story is the surface, what we see. The deeper meaning, inner life, is the twilight zone. And the big human question the story poses is the midnight zone, where all of the alien fish swim. Great description of plot. And while she was saying that, I was like, oh, I feel like this book is like kind of about plot as well, right?
Yeah.
It's like kind of structurally, it's pretty amazing, very clever. Maybe this is just my reading, but it's like 3 sections, and on the 2 bookend sections, there's like not really plot, but it's still somehow extremely propulsive. And then the middle section is like everything is not what it seems, and they like get dumped into plot.
Yeah.
Was this intentional? Was this like a meditation on plot?
Yeah.
Did you come out of it with new ideas about plot?
Yeah, I was interested in, I also like, I was just thinking about just this idea of like ongoingness and what does that mean in a narrative? Because I think conventionally when we're thinking about plot, that's a great question too, by the way. Thank you for asking that. Thank you, and thank you to Emma. But I was, when we think about plot, we're often thinking about there's resolution. Resolution and restoration is sort of the intended destination. And I was thinking, like individual threads in the book are resolved and some questions are answered, but I also, like, kind of more on an emotional or thematic level, I was really interested in this idea of what does it mean to write from a space of ongoingness, where it's sort of like we don't really know what is going to happen to us. We just know that like we are where we are. And I think, but at the same time, I also think you can't ask readers to go on this journey with you for several hundred pages and then just get to the end and be like, well, who knows? So I think I kind of used that second section where they get dumped into plot to resolve the pottier questions, right? And to resolve certain threads, like what is going on with Mind's Eye? Is there a relationship between Mind's Eye and the famous thriller author the narrator goes for, etc., in order to give myself space to like end the book in that place of ongoingness. So I was interested in, I guess, maybe like reshuffling the order, the place that resolution would normally come, which maybe conventionally would be closer to the end. Yeah, I had a lot of, when I was doing my daily meditations, I wrote them on note cards. So I had this like huge stack of note cards, and I wrote, I didn't write like the rest of the book on note cards, but I did make a stack of just elements and scenes and stuff. And so I did do some physical like reshuffling and reordering, and to see what would happen if I mixed it this way and then mixed it a different way. And so the structure grew out of that to some degree.
Oh, I love that. Are there any questions from the audience?
Hi.
I think this novel really feels like the first novel I've read that feels like what it's like to live after the end of the world, or a world.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you said it in Florida, which seems like a good place to begin the end of the world. But
could you possibly well underway there?
Did you ever try to write a Florida novel before this moment, or did you have like aborted attempts at Florida novels?
Not really. I think I have some short stories that are set in Florida. My first novel ends in Florida, but I had never gone like full Florida. And I think honestly, without realizing at the time, I probably had a little bit of a psychological block, because I think to write a novel entirely set in Florida, maybe I would get like too close to the stuff that I had been kind of avoiding in my life and also on the page. So I wonder now in hindsight if there was, again, it was kind of like the hot stove, where it was like, I could set a story in Florida, I could set a little bit of a novel in Florida, but a whole book in Florida was like, oh no, that's too much.
Is that exercise now? Do you feel like,
that's totally exercise. Yeah, maybe that's like, I think that's what it felt like. Maybe not healing, but like exercise, right? Like the demon is out. Has anyone seen the horror movie the Babadook? And so I'm so sorry if you haven't seen it, because this is a huge spoiler, but what I loved about the end of that movie is that there's this creature, right? This creature like overtakes mother and son's home and is terrifying. And at the end, instead of killing the creature or completely getting rid of the creature is like in a basement and just being fed. And it's sort of like, it's a metaphor for grief, right? You know what I mean? And it's like, you can't always eradicate grief, right? Like, but you need to figure out how to live like in relationship to it. And that's sort of how I felt at the end. Like the creature in the Babadook had just, like I hadn't totally, like it will always be with me, but it was like in proportion. So yes, but my next novel, very different kind of book. I did eventually write the literary noir novel that's about boxing. And that is set in Florida. But in all other ways, like a very different book.
Cool.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi, nice to be here. Thank you for being here. I wanted to follow up when you were talking about the voice that you found during the meditation that sounded different. How did you, were you able to just maintain that voice when you wanted to go back to it? Or did you kind of have to navigate avoiding your own voice during that, when you were developing it? Do you have any tricks for those of us who are trying to do that?
Yeah, definitely. Once I decided that I was working on like a creative project versus just personal, I mean, not that a personal project can't be creative, but a story that was kind of bigger than my own thoughts. I found that the voice was sort of right there. And sometimes like it really is my voice. There are jokes that I've told in the book, there are observations that I've had. I wanted it to feel as though you were, particularly in the early sections, I wanted to feel as though you, the reader, were kind of sitting on someone's shoulder and overhearing their private thoughts or overhearing someone thinking aloud. But it was a frequency. Like, there are times where I have had to sort of work to find or maintain a certain frequency of voice, but this one was pretty available. I think the thing that was a challenge at some point is that we start in that kind of more autofictional mode, and there's a speculative plot that doesn't fully come forward until you're about halfway through the book. And in early drafts, it felt like you were reading two different books. And there was a sort of like readerly whiplash that was happening. And so I needed to do a lot of work at having those elements sort of present thematically in different ways, imagistically, amplifying certain details, stranging certain descriptions, and allowing these qualities to operate at a hum. So when that hum starts to get louder and louder, it's not coming out of nowhere, right? Where you're like, I've had this creeping feeling that like something is off in this town. And that's something my very long-suffering spouse was like born in Queens and grew up in New England and never spent that much time anywhere in the South, let alone in Florida. And he kept being like, there is something really wrong here. So I was, thinking about that feeling of there's something off in this town, and finding small ways to amplify that. So when the veil of realism does fully fall away and speculative steps forward, it felt more organic, and there was like an inevitability to it.
Thank you for using the word hum. I really love the image. I wanted to ask you, I've loved your work for a long, long time, ever since, I think I Love Youth was my first book that I read of you. So I teach writing, and I often use the phrase that I actually found in one of your interviews, and it's the dislocation of reality. I love that term so much, and I think it always kind of traces back to you. So could you talk a little bit about, I'm not sure like where this idea comes from, but I just love whatever it stands for, but I love the term itself. I don't know if you can talk a little bit about where it comes from.
I can't off the top of my head recall like the exact origins, but I love Julio Cortázar very much, and he has a beautiful collection of essays called Literature Class, which are about just it was a series of lectures that he gave at Berkeley in the 80s, and that they were compiled, and there's one in particular on speculative fiction and time that's amazing. And he talks a lot about, there's this beautiful line that he has where he talks about like the fantastic isn't escapism, like it isn't fluffy. It's a commitment to living deeper in this reality. And I think please, like, someone in the audience, feel free to correct me if I am wrong and the true origins. But I think it was Ursula Le Guin who talked about she doesn't see herself as like a science fiction writer as much as a writer of like a vaster reality or bigger reality. And those ways of thinking about the world, maybe because I'm from Florida, like totally land with me, where it's like I'm good with descriptions like speculative and fantastic, but I also feel like it's like totally our world at the same time. Our world is weird, our world is incomprehensible. I think that there are moments where our reality is thrown out of joint like all the time. Maybe not like on a daily basis, unless you're in Florida. But I think it happens in some ways more often than we might like want to believe. And so I'm really interested in how fiction specifically can be the narrator of that vaster reality and that bigger reality and that reality that is like all around us, even if we're not making contact with it on a day-to-day basis. But yeah, probably there's a really good chance that it's a version of something that Cortázar said.
We have time for one more question.
I think.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is there someone else?
Yeah, I think you got the green light.
Okay, I got it. I'm curious to hear about your process of taking care of yourself as person when writing a book that is so much about reckoning with yourself as person, and in this time and place that was hard for all of us in different ways. So yeah, do you have any rituals, limits, things you went through?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. I didn't really have limits. I found when I started to write about my own experience in treatment, I was really alarmed, I had mentioned this earlier, by how much I couldn't remember. And I started to, it felt like I just couldn't access what I needed to access writing in a Word doc as I would normally do. And so I started writing stuff down on index cards, on the Notes app, on my phone in ways that felt less formal and less permanent. And I found that really useful. It was like I never have to look at this again. I can like crumple it up and throw it away or just very easily delete it. It's not like a part of the larger whole. And I found it helps kind of like loosen some things out of my memory. So there were some practices that I used to get where I needed to go. I started, particularly in like the earlier part of the pandemic, I mean, normally what helps me so much is boxing. I started boxing for fitness and then started boxing competitively a few years ago. And I just highly recommend like structured consensual physical violence. It's like helped everything in I'm so much calmer. It's been like the best anxiety treatment ever. But I couldn't do that for obvious reasons, which was hard. So I think, I would start every day. I think like my I've always had pretty consistent morning rituals. And I would was up early, usually at dawn, would spend some time outside with my dog. But I think for me, like being outside, being in the sun, being in nature, being with animals, my animal companion, and being with the people who love me. And that was it was an amazing time in some ways to be with my family because like there's a lot of complexity there, but these are my people, right? Like these are people, I'm very lucky in that way. Like they have known me my whole life and I have a big family. I'm one of 7. And it's like, yeah, they've known me my whole life, right? And they've seen me at my like best and at my absolute worst. And they're with me no matter what. And I'm with them. And so I think like knowing that I was working, that was the space from which I was working, just like psychologically was incredibly helpful. But I think just for anyone like in the room who's sort of struggling with this, I think having rituals can be really helpful. And I write in the morning. So doing that sort of morning routine, just like very simple. I was like going outside, a certain amount of sunshine, a certain amount of dog time, a few minutes. I have like a few minutes of breathing exercises that I do, some like basic affirmations. And then like I go in and then, and then I go back out. And it's going to look different for everyone, but I think figuring out sort of what are your transitions look like how are you getting in and how are you getting back out, and also where do you find like what makes you feel safe, you know what I mean, like what makes you feel safe, what makes you feel grounded. And if I could find enough grounding in my life then I didn't feel like I needed to put limits on what I was doing on the page, if that makes sense.
Thank you so much, Laura.
Yeah, thank you all.
real quick business. Let's give another round to Laura. So at the back desk where I was just sitting and hiding, that is where Laura will be signing books. And please wrap around the desk to that. A lot of you have actually been here before, so you know what to do, so just guide everyone else down that way. Please go buy all the books. That's what we're going to do, right? If you already bought one, buy another one for a friend at the registers up front. Thank you so much.
I have an adorable little Florida stamp that I'm
yes.
stamping books with, yes.
I love that.
But you can only get it if I'm here.
I love that. Hey, that's it. Thanks so much to everyone for coming.
Thank you.